Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Oakville Town Hall, and to those of you who are not from Oakville, welcome to our community. You're most welcome here. My name is Jeff Knoll. I'm a councillor here in the town of Oakville in the region of Halton, and it's my great pleasure to co-host tonight's information session with Lifeline Syria. And we're very, very pleased that we've had such a great turnout and so much interest in helping out with this international crisis. A couple quick things I wanted to mention to you is that this wouldn't be possible this evening without the support of my council colleagues who have obviously agreed to allow us to use these facilities at no charge, so there's no fundraising money going into the use of these facilities. And a couple of my colleagues with me here tonight, Councillor Mark Grant, who's up there with the iPhone taking pictures, and Councillor Ellen Elgar is back there somewhere from Ward 4. He's also joining us tonight. There's a great deal of interest both on town council and regional council, and I've got to tell you that the amount of support that my colleagues have offered in terms of the various facilities that we have at our disposal, both physical facilities as well as social service facilities, has been overwhelming, and I'm very grateful for that. His Worship, Rob Burton, our mayor, was not able to be with us tonight. He had a prior engagement. He attempted to change that, but unfortunately the business of the town had to be dealt with. But he has sent a message, and I just want to read that to you tonight because he's a big supporter of what we are trying to accomplish here in our community. So he says, "Good evening. I want to thank you for attending this information session organized by Councillor Jeff Knoll, Lifeline Syria. It takes a certain kind of person to think about helping those in need, someone who is kind and caring and has compassion for others. All of you here tonight encompass these characteristics and more. Your interest in helping the crisis in Syria by sponsoring a Syrian refugee is inspiring. In Oakville, we are very fortunate. Many of us are financially privileged and able to enjoy more than just the necessities of life. That is why it is so wonderful to see this community come together time and time again to help those who are struggling with hardships. It is proof of the mindset that is coupled to our town's livability, and it truly reflects former Harry Barrett's notion that Oakville is a city that calls itself a town and feels like a village. On behalf of Oakville Town Council, I'd like to thank you again for attending. It feels good to do good, and so tonight we are aiming to provide you with all the information needed to make it easier for you to sponsor a Syrian family in need." And again, that's signed by His Worship, Mayor Burton. Now, I'm not going to make a political speech tonight. I'm going to get off the stage and I'm going to introduce you to our presenter tonight, Alexandra, who is going to walk us through the presentation. But I just want to say a couple quick things. First of all, as the mayor alluded in his letter, this is a community with lots of money in it, but more than the money, we have some really great people with a lot of goodwill. And I think that a community as privileged as Oakville really can step up to help in a time of need, and this is certainly a time of need. So if you're from Oakville, or if you're from other places, we really need your help to make a difference in the world, and we are certainly in a position to do that. Now, one of the things that I've been working on is to try to find ways to make it easier for groups to sponsor here in Oakville, because in addition to the man hours that are required and the initiative, it's a lot of money. It's quite a bit of money to actually sponsor a family. I believe it's around $30,000 for a family of 4 roughly, and you need to make that commitment, and you'll hear more about that tonight. So one of the things that we've done, and it was just approved this morning, is that the Oakville Community Foundation, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization in town that manages the funds of several individuals and organizations in town, has set up the Oakville Resettlement Fund. I should remember that I named it. And this fund has been set up and it's active right now, and there's a piece of paper which gives you details on that fund on the back table, and it will collect money which can then be distributed to groups or neighborhoods or whomever is actually doing the sponsoring. The benefit of working through OCF is that there's a tax receipt, obviously, to those who donate, but more importantly, there's accountability, transparency, and an audit at the end of the day. So it gives people that comfort level that the money is going to where it's supposed to be going, and that it is predominantly, or the vast majority, is going to the actual relief need as opposed to administration. So I encourage you, if you are setting up your own group, or if you simply want to contribute, to consider using the OCF. If you are a group and you're organizing a group, then I encourage you to see Wendy. Wendy, where are you? And Caroline. They're both here from OCF. And you can talk to myself as well. they'll be around throughout the evening, and you can talk to them about how you can interact with them or simply make a contribution to the fund that others can use. The last thing I want to say about the fund is that it is not earmarked for any specific group right now. It is open and accessible to all groups that are interested in sponsorship. So whether you are a church, a neighborhood association, a group of friends, a business, whomever wants to get involved in the sponsorship, we can leverage the Oakville Community Foundation's local credibility and financial prowess to be able to do that. Now, I just want to state that there are a number of initiatives already in play, and some of you may be already aware of those here in town. The interfaith community is working hard on raising money. They have a fundraiser coming up. Recently, a local group of neighbors put together an Indiegogo campaign. Are you here, by the way, from that group? Oh, of course, I just met you a couple seconds ago. My short-term memory loss. And they're out there raising money through Indiegogo. So there's lots of interesting and fun initiatives happening in order to actually move these respective sponsorships forward. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to cover, except I'll say once again, thank you so much for being here tonight. We're very pleased to be able to help as the town, as individual councillors. And I really encourage you to talk to the OCF folks, talk to myself about that process as well. And Alexandra, without further ado, I want to hand it over to you and your presentation. And thank you for coming to Oakville, by the way.
No problem. Happy to come.
I'm going to grab that and that.
Whoop, so, yeah. Okay, we're gonna play test 1, 2, 3. Is that what we're gonna do? 1, 2, we're good? Okay. I've spoken into a lot of mics recently, so I know the drill. So, good evening, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here. First trip to Oakville. So, wonderful location. I have to say, maybe we don't put this on our actual feed, but you might be winning over the Toronto City Hall. I'm not sure. It's kind of prettier here. You've got inside trees and all that. So anyway, I'm Alexandra Kotick. I used to be able to say I was the only staff person of Lifeline Syria, but as of Monday, we had a volunteer coordinator hired. So now there's 2 staff people at Lifeline Syria. So if you have emailed us or you've tried to call us and we haven't been as responsive, I apologize, but we had 1,400 unread emails in 48 hours when the picture broke. So we're just trying to develop community meetings like this so that we can explain sponsorship and help people get moving forward. So just a little quick about me. I used to work for the Anglican United Churches doing their sponsorship program. I've been in the field helping with sponsorship for about 9 years. I have done training overseas. My work, somebody recently said, so I guess your whole career has been in refugee work? And I said, yeah, I guess that's true. So that's what I know, and I'm learning a lot about other practices while we're working on this project. So there'll be time for questions afterwards if I don't cover something you wanted to learn in the presentation. We don't have a mic, but I'll ask people to come to the front when I'm done for questions, try and answer them as best we can. But I'm going to go through the presentation first, and I'll ask for questions at the end. So, just a quick overview of Lifeline Syria so you can kind of get an understanding of who's involved in this whole process. So Lifeline Syria, just because I typed it first, not because it's most important, is up there at the top. Obviously the refugees are involved in this, the sponsor groups, the government at all levels, and settlement agencies. So these are sort of the major players that are involved in private sponsorship. What is Lifeline Syria? How it began is an interesting story, actually. I don't know if people in the crowd remember Operation Lifeline, so the Indo-Chinese or boat people crisis, end of 1970s, 1980s. The people were fleeing mostly Vietnam. They were in boats, which is why they were called the boat people at the time. And it was sort of the first crisis that Canadians went like, well, hang on, how can we help these people? And at that point, private sponsorship started. And we're the only country currently that has private sponsorship, which is really a testament for how welcoming and wonderful Canadians are, that we've managed to keep the program going for this long. We won an award in '86 from the UN, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, for the work that Canada did. It's a good year, '86. I was born that year, so good year. We do have some great history of this. And so there was a group of citizens in December who came together and said, you know, we know about what happened with the Indo-Chinese crisis. That was a major problem. What's happening in Syria now? Why is nobody paying attention? Or it's small groups that are trying to pay attention. There hasn't been any big movement. Can we do something about that? So they started talking, they formed a committee, they got working on what we could do, what our goals would be, and in June we launched of this year, so we're a bit of a baby still, and so we've been working diligently to try and develop processes and help people sponsor. Then of course the photo came out at the beginning of the month, and it really revved things up. So when we began, we launched with the goal of bringing 1,000 Syrian refugees to the Greater Toronto Area over the next 2 years. And I've been joking with people recently, I think we might do that by December at the point we're going to, because there are so many refugees in need. There's so many wonderful people like you who are stepping forward. We aren't stopping with the 1,000th person. We will keep sponsoring, but that was our goal at that time. What we will do is we'll be a matchmaking service in a sense. I like to say facilitation, but everyone keeps defaulting to matchmaking service, so we're a matchmaking service. We'll be getting all the groups together who need to be involved. So whether it's the sponsorship agreement holders who can submit the cases easily, or working with you on a group of 5, because the Government of Canada on Saturday did relax some of the rules for community groups and groups of 5 sponsorship. The cases that we have from Syrian Canadians who are family and friends of Syrians overseas that have come forward saying, can you help us sponsor the family, or from direct referrals from the UNHCR that come to the Government of Canada that we also have, which are higher needs cases sometimes, but are also available for groups. So we'll be matching all the groups, all the cases, all the sponsors together. And we'll mostly be working with individuals like you, some corporations that are choosing to sponsor, sponsorship agreement holders, settlement agencies, the government, as many partners as we can gather around the table to make sure that these people are received and properly supported when they get here. So, just quickly, this is not the whole definition, but a portion of the definition from the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, on who is a refugee. And it also is used by our government, the Canadian government, to define a refugee. We have a subcategory which is more generalized, but usually this is the definition that most people are accepted on for being refugees. So the part to look at specifically in this is first, a little bit down under the bolded part, they have to be outside of their country of nationality. So Syrians are not refugees while they're still in Syria. They're internally displaced people. You have to have crossed the international border of your country in order to be defined as a refugee under Canadian or international law. And usually the reason that they flee is based on one of the 5 bolded categories of persecution: race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. So just to clarify what membership in a particular social group is, because that's the one that isn't as obvious, a lot of times these are females. If they're in a country where there's no protection because you're female and you're alone, that could mean that you're part of a particular social group that needs protection. Also, the gay, lesbian, transgendered, bisexual community, LGBT community tends to be very persecuted. So those are examples of groups that are persecuted under that category. And so they're unable to go home. That's the last part of this. They're unwilling or unable to avail themselves of the protection of their country. So right now, obviously, Syria is in a civil war. So they're not able to go home, they're not allowed to be protected. They usually cannot stay in the country they're currently living in, and so that means that they need to seek another option. So a lot of people, as you would have seen, which is the reason that we had that horrible photo come out, are trying to flee to Europe because at least there's some protection in Europe. But obviously Europe can't handle everyone coming, and part of the reason they're fleeing is they see no other hope for them to be resettled in the countries they're currently staying in, which tend to be Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan as the bordering countries. So that's part of the reason that private sponsorship and resettlement in general from countries is such an important piece of protection, because it allows people who are very vulnerable and very in need to be resettled to another country so they don't have to seek those desperate solutions like getting on a raft and potentially dying in the Mediterranean. So in Canada, once somebody is interviewed by a Canadian visa office overseas and passes the definition of a refugee, they also go through a few extra screenings. They must also pass the security and criminality screening. So security is something that's big, broad. So they look at the Interpol, they look through CSIS, they check to see if anyone's been part of a terrorist group or if they've been supportive of a major regime that Canadian government would not consider to be acceptable under their requirements. And then they look at criminality. Have they committed any major crimes? The caveat to that is if your major crime is the reason for your persecution, like a lot of people ended up in jail because of their political protest, that obviously is the reason why you're being persecuted. It is not necessarily you committing a major crime. So there's certain things that people do that wouldn't count, but generally, if there's been a major crime committed, they would not be admissible to come to Canada. They also go through a basic medical screening, which usually screens out things that are communicable. Oh, good, I said it. Usually at the end of the day, I can't say that word. So it's usually just things like, for instance, in East Africa, a lot of people have tuberculosis or malaria, so things that maybe are a danger if they are traveling, and things that need to be treated right away before they can travel, but it doesn't usually screen them out from arriving in Canada. Some refugees have lost limbs or have other medical needs that need to be treated, and usually if there is treatment available in the country they're going to, and that's part of the reason they need to be resettled, that is an acceptable reason and they pass their medical screening. So on arrival, the refugees become permanent residents. So they have access to the same things that any other permanent resident has access to. They also have to follow the same rules and responsibilities as another permanent resident on their way to hopefully becoming citizens. But that does mean that they can't access social assistance under this program. So the goal of this program for private sponsorship is that you are their support for the year. They do not access social assistance during that year. So private sponsorship just generally is the resettlement of a refugee to Canada. So they've left their country, they're in another country, they can't stay there, so they resettle to a third country. And the financial costs and support, settlement support, is provided by groups or organizations. So the government sponsors their refugees, we sponsor the refugees privately, and over the years, actually, Canada's private program has been one of the 4th largest in the world to bring refugees in, so it's quite a strong program. The sponsoring groups must provide financial support or settlement assistance, and settlement assistance for 12 months or until the refugee becomes self-sufficient. Everyone always asks me about this one. So it has to be 12 months. If they are able to find a job and start working within that 12 months and support themselves, you can slowly reduce based on if they're able to support themselves at a reasonable amount, the amount of money you have to give. Likely you cannot reduce the amount of settlement support you have to give, but over time they will require less input from you as the sponsors. But if they lose that income within the 12 months, you have to start supporting them again. Your commitment is no longer than 12 months at any point, though. So the maximum you're required to support them for is the 12 months. It may be less if they're able to be connected to support services or if they're able to start working. A lot of Syrians have post-secondary education. They're very entrepreneurial. It's one of the groups that I've seen that has actually settled quite well. And I know there's a strong Syrian community here in Oakville. There is also in Toronto that are helping people connect in with services. But you are also a wonderful connector to them to find jobs and be able to support themselves. This slide is about sponsorship agreement holders. Now, when the announcement happened on Saturday that Chris Alexander, our current immigration minister, opened up the rules a little bit more, I haven't, quite frankly, changed this slide because I'm going to suggest that people still consider working under sponsorship agreement holders. So in private sponsorship, there are groups of 5, there are community sponsors, and there are sponsorship agreement holders. Groups of 5 and community sponsors used to require a refugee status determination document, and that was something Lifeline Syria pushed to be removed and has been removed as of Saturday. So you can now have a group of 5 permanent residents or citizens who get together and they decide that they will take on the liability of the family, and I'll tell you how much that is soon. And they themselves will submit the case without needing a larger institution to help them submit the case, which is great. And if you can do it, we're happy to help you with the refugee side of the paperwork. We're happy to help you work through how you would do your side and prove that you're able to support. However, there are organizations called sponsorship agreement holders who have legal agreements with the federal government that allow them to submit sponsored cases, allow them to submit refugee cases, and they have, because of this legal agreement, you don't have to show as much up front to prove your ability to sponsor, and you don't have the same liable costs. So it's not to say that you don't have to have the money to sponsor, but when you're doing a group of 5, you have to show through a T4 or a bank account or some other means that you and the other 5 people have the funds to support these people. In sponsorship agreement holders, you have to prove that to the sponsorship agreement holder, who might ask for that money in an account, but also might just be okay with you giving pledges. So, and these cases tend to go a lot faster through the central processing in Winnipeg because they're recognized groups that have staff that know how to do paperwork. I used to work for one, so I'm aware of how to do the paperwork in a way that means that it gets through processing. So it's not to lock out the groups of 5 or community sponsors, but I would suggest that, you know, there's a lot of religious institutions and ethnic institutions and a few community centers that have these agreements. We have agreements, memorandums of understanding with them that allow us to submit cases. If you're part of a religious group specifically is the one that tends to have a lot of these agreements, I would encourage you to let us know because we might be able to connect you directly back into your sponsorship agreement. So for instance, United Church, Anglican, Lutheran, Mennonite, Unitarian, Presbyterian, I'm probably forgetting a bunch, synagogues, a few mosques. So a lot of those groups have their own agreements and we are in agreement with them on how to work with them. So let us know if you're going to be sponsoring, if you're already connected into that community. If you're not, we'd be happy to connect you to that community. You don't need to find the sponsorship agreement holder. We already have those agreements. So what would your role be as a sponsor? So I've talked about what other people are responsible for, who the refugees are, who the sponsorship agreement holders are. What are you going to be responsible for if you choose to participate in this program? So the first thing that always is the thing that people get worried about, which I will tell you right now is probably not going to be an issue, quite frankly, is financial support. I'll tell you how much that is in a minute, but one of the main things you have to provide is the financial support. These people need something to live on until they can find a job, or in the 12 months until they're able to support themselves later on. They are allowed to go on social assistance after the 12 months, so you can help them for the 12 months, you can help them find jobs. You financially have to support them. You also need to connect them to settlement support, and I'll tell you specifically what settlement agencies do in a minute, but there are a lot of settlement agencies, and I know there are strong ones here in Oakville that can help connect people to different services. But what your biggest strength is going to be is filling in the gaps. So you're giving them some money, they're going to get some services through a settlement support agency, but those are 9 to 5 Monday to Friday staff, and things don't stop outside of those hours. And they also need advocates to help them when they go do things at the settlement agencies or when, I don't know why this happens, trying to get an OHIP card is always a problem. If anyone works for Service Ontario, I want to talk to you afterwards because something goes wrong when you go to get an OHIP card. So you need to go and help these people be an advocate for them to work through the Canadian system. You also need to help them understand, you know, police in Canada, very different than if you're from another country, where you can usually trust a police officer if you have a problem, or how you go to a walk-in clinic if your child is sick. There's things that seem obvious to us that are not going to be obvious to them, and there are things that you can give them advice on that if they didn't have you, they might struggle more with. I always think about my, this just came up because somebody was asking me about it recently, like why I do the work I do, and I thought about my Ukrainian ancestors when they came to Quebec. My Baba and Guido, my great-grandparents, had my uncle's great uncle and my grandfather, and they were felling trees, and they would go into the woods to fell the trees to clear the area that they were using, and they'd leave the babies on a blanket, and they'd put pitch on them so that the bugs would stay off of them, and they'd say, okay, we hope we see you when you get back, because we've gone into the woods, so don't have a bear eat you. So, you know, there's no support system there. So this is what the strength of private sponsorship is. It's meaning that these people are feeling supported by the community that they're resettling into. So you are their strength. You are their Canadian connector. There was a young woman who was sponsored who came to Canada, and I was talking to her, and she said, you know, I'm trying to get a job. I apply everywhere. I have a little bit of Canadian experience, but I can't seem to get anyone to give me a job. And I said, okay, so walk me through what you do. She said, well, I go into a store, And they say, okay, you can apply online. I said, there's your problem. There's hundreds of people applying online. Go in, shake their hand, leave a resume, try and make a connection, and I'll be your reference, by the way, because I know that you're a good hard worker. And she got a job in a month. So you can be that Canadian connector that helps them be able to settle. And I'm sure that lots of people in your families and friends had those people that helped them with that initial connection. When you are not responsible, people will say to me, okay, that's great. I get what I'm responsible for. What am I not responsible for? If they go into debt, you are not responsible. If they break the law, you are not responsible. You're not a guarantor of the person. Your rights and the responsibilities, rather, are specifically laid out on the undertaking you sign, and that is all you are responsible for. You are also not responsible for providing them if they have a high medical need with extra costs on medical support. This is sometimes what people would consider a moral requirement, but it is not a legal requirement that you help pay for that. And there's a lot of doctors right now that are setting up services for pro bono work for these people that are, being very activist and helping with these things. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. The refugees do also, well, they're not refugees when they arrive, they're newcomers when they arrive. They do get access to a program called the Interim Federal Health Program, which some of you might have heard of because there's been a few court cases about this. So where it lands right now, and it's still under review, I believe, is that if you are sponsoring government refugees, so refugees that come from the UN, that are in our embassies, interview them, and then you sponsor those refugees, they're called blended visa office referred cases, they get the full complement of interim federal health because they're receiving some dollars from the government potentially. If you are not sponsoring those refugees, so anyone that we name, that we say that's the refugee we want, and we send their paperwork overseas, the children get interim federal health, the parents do not. So I always encourage people to consider fundraising a little bit of extra money on top per adult in case there are things like what tends to happen, quite frankly, is dental. People haven't had access to dental care, and a lot of diets are very rich in sugar, and they don't get the nutrients where they're not eating, vegetables and brushing their teeth every day in a refugee situation necessarily. So those are the things that don't seem so obvious and don't seem so immediate, but it's very difficult if you have a cavity that's very painful for you to learn English because your teeth hurt. So consider that when you're thinking about if you're going to, how much you're going to fundraise. So speaking of fundraise, this is the financial chart. I don't make up these numbers. This is Citizenship and Immigration Canada, and we are going to have a handout, I believe, wherever Olga went. I'm just going to assume that we have a handout. Yes? Handout? Yes. Handout. Lots of, okay, good. We have a handout at the end that you can get so you don't have to scribble all this down. So what I like to look at here is this far column on your right is the total liability. So when I say that you have a responsibility for 12 months, that's the maximum amount you're liable for. But then if we look at that in a realistic way, I, as a single person, can't live on $12,600 for 1 year. I don't know how that would work, but these rates are actually based on social assistance rates. So it's a very, very minimal amount. Is that acceptable? Probably not, but that's all you're required to put up. And I look at that and then the income per month. So you have the startup costs in the one column, which is how much they assume that you need to do to buy things like furniture and pots and pans and food staples and clothing. And then they say the rest of that, which is the 12 months of income support, is divided by 12. So then per month, a single person, according to Citizenship and Immigration Canada, should be able to provide for all of their necessities on $817. I don't think so, but that's all you're liable for. So I would encourage you to really consider, people say, well, then how much should I raise? My best answer to you is I, as a single person, can tell you how much I need to live on, but I don't know how much it costs to raise a family of 4. Go talk to your friends and family who have a family size that you're considering sponsoring and figure out how much realistically you think you should put up. But as a liable cost, again, this is all you are required to put up. Settlement is the next thing. So you have financial, and then you have the settlement requirements. And all these lovely bubbles, some of whom are falling off the screen, I apologize for that, are telling you some of the tasks you might have to do in order to welcome people at the airport. You're going to have to orient them to life in Canada. Arranging temporary accommodations can be a big thing, especially depending on the size of the family. Permanent accommodation is something that obviously is going to be needed. And then there's other things, health cards, dentists, doctors, enrolling children in school. They do qualify for child tax benefits, which can help top up the amount of money that they're living on. And you can decide, if you're planning on giving them a bit more money until the child tax benefits comes in, and then that much will cover off some of the costs. Enrolling them in English classes, other things like that. Where is it? The purplish blue bubble, provide emotional and moral support. So some of the things that are in these bubbles are things that have to be done right away. And things that once you do them, they're done. You enroll a child in school, great. Kids in school, we're fine. Providing emotional and moral support is more long-term and more difficult. And we are working with CCTV, the Center for Victims of Torture and Trauma, or whichever that is, specifically, to try and talk to sponsors about holding sessions about post-traumatic stress disorder, about depression, about other issues. Because I am never going to guarantee you that the refugees who are coming are not going to have mental health problems aside from physical health problems. Because the reality is that they've been in a really horrific situation. They've had to leave their families to flee. Potentially they've lost people on the way. They've been in a refugee camp, which can be very damaging mentally if you're just sort of isolated and you don't know what's going to happen, and maybe you've had friends that have gone on this trip to Europe and they've died on the way. So while people usually do well, and while their kids do well in school, and as soon as they find a job, that's really something that is very good for their mental health, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to need help. You should not be the experts on this. There are trained professionals. If you have people in your groups who are trained professionals, that's great, but you're their friends to provide support and assistance, help them understand how to access these systems, but please never be a counselor. It's not your position. You shouldn't have to take that on. Give them to people, give them resources that will help them with these services. So I would encourage you, as part of a settlement plan and things to start thinking about now, to see what services are available in your area to help with these people. So what does the government do? I've talked a lot about what Lifeline's going to do, what you're supposed to do. How does the government fit into this? Well, we work on all of what I talked about, getting the money ready, getting the support services ready, and then we're going to submit a case. So the group has a form, and a set of forms in the case, and the refugee has a set of forms in the case. Don't worry about trying to figure out these government forms. I warn you now, if you're an insomniac like I am and you need to go to sleep quickly, read government forms. They're really wonderful if you need to go to sleep quickly. But other than that, it's not worth it. We have developed a system to help the refugees complete their forms, which is a lot simpler, and we will help you with the forms that you need to complete. And we have a next step session that we'll be holding if you commit to doing this project, that will explain how to work through the forms, explain some of the parts that you need to fill in. So those are the two parts that are given to the government. They go to central processing in Winnipeg. They're usually processed in about a week for Syrians. Then they get sent overseas to the visa office, and the infrastructure is being revved up based on the announcement on Saturday by Chris Alexander to say that there are more visa offices overseas with more staff and more resources. So we're expecting people might start arriving after that whole process has taken place and the case is overseas, 4 to 6 months, maybe longer in certain parts of the world. So we have seen people arrive in 4 to 6 months. Turkey seems to still be taking longer, maybe a year, but I'm hoping that's going to be reduced. If you sponsor someone in a Gulf country, like Saudi Arabia or EUA or those countries, we're not sure yet specifically. Don't look on the government website about the times. People will say to me, but on the government website it says, X number of months. That's for all cases being processed out of that post. Syrians are being put at the top of the pile. So we can tell you anecdotally how much we think it will take. We'll start to see more results where we can give you a better idea as people start arriving. So they will be, the case will go overseas, they'll go through their interview, most likely an interview, they'll be told they're accepted, the clearance will be done, that's the medicals, criminality, and security screenings, and then the International Organization for Migration arranges arrival. You don't help book their tickets, you don't help arrange their exit visas or anything like that. There's an agency overseas that does this. But there's a catch. This is, by the way, my bad Canadian joke. So we love people to feel very Canadian on arrival. We give them debt. They get a loan for their travel that they have to repay. So the medical costs, the screening, and the flight, and any exit permits that they have to pay for, that cost is covered, that the government gives them a loan, which is organized by the International Organization for Migration, and when they arrive, they have to start repaying it. Depending on the size of the loan, and it's usually somewhere from a couple $1,000s per person in the family, they will get a time that is interest-free, and you can help them defer the loan if that's something that's helpful for them, so that they're not panicking about trying to repay the loan right away. But they will get a collections notice within a couple of months of arrival, which is very worrying for a lot of people who have, especially if they've never had debt before. So this is something that you don't have to help them repay. Some groups choose to help repay. Some groups will say, we put this much money aside, and at the end of the sponsorship, we didn't use it all, so we're going to give it to them to repay the loan. But I'm putting it out there, not your responsibility, but something you should be aware of. So the settlement agencies, of which there are many strong ones, I understand in Oakville, they're mainly funded to provide these services. Language employment, completing government documents, which are usually the SIN forms, the OHIP forms, child tax benefit forms. Some of them will go and be interpreters when the refugees or newcomers take those forms to the correct agency. Some don't have capacity to do that, so you might have to help them with that. But the language employment are the two strong ones. And then they do other services. For instance, I know of conversation circles that take place in a lot of the agencies in Toronto. So as opposed to the formal language training, there's also a time when you sit and you just discuss things and you learn how to use the language in a different way. A lot of them have programming for women and youth, because these are two areas that they want to focus on. So the women sometimes get together and they make a meal and everyone gets to take some of it home, and there's childcare and the kids get to do activities. A lot of the youth get support services where they can talk about it, because some of this, the hardest settlement is for people who are about 19 to almost 30. Because sometimes they're too old to go into high school, but they're sort of too young to be in the language training with their parents, and that's kind of like, I don't want to sit in a classroom with my parents and learn English. Like, I want my own program. So those are the ones that I really encourage you to have somebody, if you can, who's youth, that's part of your group. Because it's really good if they can be connected in, if they're not able to go to high school, then they need to be connected in some way to a youth program or someone who's youth in the area. So that's an area I would encourage you to consider. But the settlement agencies also have programming. So, you probably heard me talk enough by now. What are you doing next? What are the next steps? I didn't delete this slide, so this is actually my next step slide. There we go. Next steps is to assess what you have and what you need. So I'm sure that you have been thinking about this, you've been planning for this, you thought, okay, we're going to come here, we'll learn about it, and we got to go, what are we going to do next? Do you have enough people? We suggest no less than 5, no more than 10 as your core group of people that will take on the case. I say no more than 10 because really I find it gets unwieldy if you have too many people trying to make decisions for the family. It doesn't mean that people can't come in for certain specific tasks. Like one of my groups one time said, we just need someone to get them curtains for their kitchen. I thought, okay, well, there's a very specific task. But the people who are going to be mainly responsible need to be probably no less than 5, shouldn't be any more than 10. And you should have people in this core group that can commit to at least somebody or 2 people for daytime, at least somebody for the evenings, somebody for the weekends, and preferably somebody or somebodies for emergencies, because emergencies are emergencies. You can't plan for them. And it tends to happen very quickly. I've had a lot of people who need to go to a clinic when they arrive because the water's different or the food's different, and it's, like when we go to another country and you're trying to figure out where do you go if your stomach is not particularly happy. So figure out how many people you have and how many people you need, and are they willing to make a commitment to this? You might not have arrivals right away. It could happen in a couple months. It might take 6 months or a year. We're really hoping it doesn't. But people need to be ready to make that commitment and for the commitment of the year when the family arrives. And you need to figure out how you're going to fundraise. So we don't need money in a bank account now, and there's this wonderful fund that was Jeff spoke of earlier that you can talk to them about how your money can maybe be put in that fund for fundraising, or if you have a group that you need to get a tax receipt, if that's what you want, a tax receipt, you could talk to groups you're connected with who might be able to give out tax receipts for your fundraising. But we don't need you to have it in the bank, we just need to know how you're gonna get the money. So get as much together as you can. Tell us how you're going to make the commitment to the rest, and then we will consider you ready. So once you've figured out the people and the funds, that's your group. Your group has been formed, and you want to contact us. It's not Take Action anymore. Actually, I changed that it's Take Action. It's not group. It's the group form. So it's take the group form step is under Take Action and group form on our website. Sorry, end of the day. So on our website, there's a tab that says Take Action, there's a group form, you fill out the group form. As soon as you fill out that form, we'll invite you to a next step session where we'll get into the very, very specific liability that you're taking on. We'll help you with your settlement plan, what you need to do to do the settlement planning. If you want to start thinking about that, you can go on the government website and look up the sponsorship agreement holders settlement plan or group of 5 settlement plan. It's the same, they're 2 different forms. Or the undertaking 5373, I believe it's the number. And you can start thinking about how your group's going to put all this information together. So 3 last thoughts. We are already connected to the sponsorship agreement holders, so if you don't have an existing connection, you don't need to go out and talk to the groups that have agreements, because a lot of them are so busy right now they might not be able to answer you. So let us worry about, if you want to work under a SAW, connecting you to a SAW. If you don't have a refugee family or person that you want to sponsor, we have people who need to be sponsored. But if you do have somebody in mind that you would like to sponsor, we are going to be holding another session here on Monday, I believe, 28th, yes, Monday. I'm getting some head nods, we switched the date. So if you have someone you want to sponsor, I would encourage you to come back on Monday and hear the presentation that's specific to who needs to be sponsored, and you'll get next steps on how to bring those cases forward. And don't worry about completing any government forms yourself. We will help you with that because they are quite complicated. So with that, I will say thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, please come to the front because we don't have a mic so I can hear you. I'll take people up here as they line up. Oh, we have a mic. Look at that. Amazing staff here. So if you wouldn't mind coming to over here, and they're going to come to you if they have questions. Because if you have to run around, you're going to lose a lot of weight. So come up to the front here, and people can answer the questions. Thank you.
Very good presentation, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit of, one of the problems is the language.
Right.
So if we have a group of 10 people, but English and French speakers, what kind of help can we get with respect to language?
So a lot of the settlement agencies will have Arabic speakers. There's a lot of people in the community that I would encourage you to connect with who will be Arabic speakers. We have asked the Syrian community that we're in touch with to start identifying Syrian resource people who can be your connector to either translate or do other things. But quite frankly, while they might arrive with no English, or they might arrive with some English or French, you also don't want to depend too heavily on translators, because that's not a good way to learn a language. So charades are great. I can tell you how to get a really good picture dictionary, Arabic to English picture dictionary that I've used. Learn how to say shukran, which is thank you, marhaban, which is hello, assalamu alaikum, which is the more formal hello, and I think you'll be fine. So, is this a question?
Sort of 2 parts. If you can demonstrate you have all the means, except you're not a group of 5, will they make exceptions for smaller groups? And if you are, let's say, a union, how do you sponsor if, let's say, as an executive member, like sponsor and majority of the branch of my union?
Okay, so if you don't have 5 people, fill out the form anyway, and we'll invite you to the next step session, and we try and give space for people to join other groups at that point, but keep looking for people would be my encouragement. And I'm sorry, I didn't understand the last question. A union and...
Let's say we're a union.
Right.
And we'd like to sponsor as a union, but individuals on the executive board taking the legal responsibility.
I see. So the union would have to decide if they are willing to sign on to commit the union to the sponsorship, and they would sign as whoever has liable rights to commit the union to that. Or you as the group of 5 can just be a group under a sponsorship agreement holder. The union doesn't necessarily need to be involved. So I throw it back to you to talk to them about whether they're willing to commit to it. Okay. Oh, the question.
If I can support the family myself, can I provide notify for other people to sign? Do I have to have the group of 5 to get them in?
So what I would encourage you to do is to tell us that in our form and come to a next step session. And also, we are going to have Syrian family members here who are looking to have their family sponsored, and they might have a group there that you could be connected with, because you'd want to include the family members in the group that are here in Canada already. So that might be enough people to develop the support. But you can't submit the case by yourself, because you can't do, I promise you, I know it might seem like it, you can't do everything. As much as wonderful as that would be, you do need more people to be involved.
And how difficult is it to find more people to sign for?
Well, if you have all the money, I'm going to say probably not that difficult.
Can you provide that?
Well, let's just put it this way. If anyone wants to join this gentleman's group, you've got some people behind you, so he's going to be up here, and you can come and find him, and maybe you're going to form a group right now.
You're talking about the time frame.
Yeah,
And it's for people, for example, they're in Egypt, Syria, and all in Egypt.
right.
And Egypt before that was not considered as a camp.
Yeah, they're urban refugees mostly.
So is it the same now, considered that they can be brought into Canada the same?
Syrians, no matter where they are, whether they're in a camp or they're in an urban setting, are refugees that can be identified to be resettled. The issue with Egypt has been that there's a lot of cases and it's long processing. However, I have heard recently that cases are going a lot faster. So there's no issue with them being in Egypt. It might take a little bit longer. It might not be 6 months. It might be 8 or 12 months. But they will still be able to be processed. It's not an issue of them being in Egypt. They're processed through Cairo. Not a problem. Okay? Did you have a question? Okay. A point and then a question.
Just wanted to let everybody know there's a number of people arriving right now believing that this meeting starts at 8 o'clock. There was an error in the Oakville Beaver, apparently. So for those of you who have arrived and you're just coming in now and the presentation is basically over, what I can tell you is that the presentation is being videotaped courtesy of Sheridan College, and it will be online on the Lifeline Syria.ca website at some point after tomorrow. Peter has told me they'll have it at some point tomorrow. So we apologize for that. We tried to get the information out accurately, but I think with the time constraints, it got confused. So apologies, but we definitely want your interest. And just want to mention one thing on the matchmaking. We're going to make sure, those of us who are helping here in Oakville, we'll make sure that we circulate. If there are people looking to join groups, we'll make sure that we can do some matchmaking as well out here.
Well, I think this gentleman might be spoken for already, but otherwise, that's great. Thank you so much. So, and for those who have just arrived, please listen to the questions. I usually am up here afterwards for a little while. I can't go through my whole presentation again, but if you have a burning question, I might be able to answer it. So I'm sorry that we didn't see you earlier.
I have a question about Palestinian refugees who actually live in Syria all their lives, so they consider Syria as their home country, but they don't have documentation, so they're not Syrian citizens.
Right.
Does this program help them? Can this program help them anyway?
So Palestinians are considered to be from Syria, as in that is their country of habitual residence. And so because we are able to name them, so we have to know the UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, does not give them refugee status because they're supposed to go under UNRWA. But the benefit of private sponsorship is we can say we want that refugee, and we can put in their paperwork, and I have sponsored lots of Palestinian Syrians, so it's not an issue.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, can a group of 5 sponsor multiple families or individuals if there's sufficient funds?
If there's sufficient funds, and you can sort of, depending on the sizes, I mean, if you want to sponsor 10 families to 10, I might say, that might be a bit of a problem. But what does tend to happen is, I should have actually brought this up before. So family unit in Canadian law for immigration is spouses, so usually mom, dad, and children under 19. If your child is over 19, they are considered a non-dependent at that point, and they are their own case. parents, aunts and uncles, brothers, sisters are not considered part of the family unit. They are all their own cases. So a lot of people will sponsor what is, in our terms, and certainly in Syrian terms, a family unit. The government would consider them like 4 or 5 different cases. So potentially, if that's what you're looking at, where people maybe will living together, or there's some way of that you can show that you have enough resources financially and commitment of time, I don't see a problem with multiple submissions. If you're going to do it as a group of 5, as the official group of 5 under the federal government, they might have an issue because you're committing multiple times with the same people and the same money. But if you're doing it as a sponsorship agreement holder, we can discuss if they would feel accepting of that. And it should be okay.
And the second question is, what kind of proof do they need to demonstrate that they're actually out of the country? So
What do they need to demonstrate
like
this?
the refugees themselves, do they need to like do certificates from the UN or anything like that?
Well, usually we trust people if they say they're living somewhere else. But I do know that there has been, certainly in, was it Jordan or Lebanon? Jordan, thank you. Yes, a lot of people were going back and forth, especially because of healthcare, because there wasn't good healthcare. So it's a bit of a gray area, quite frankly, because by going back to your country, usually you would not be considered a refugee anymore, but obviously you can't stay there, so you've had to flee again. So the only thing I would say about that is, at this point, it seems to be, oh, thank you very much, that you have to be processed with whatever country you're in. You're telling the government, this is where I am, I'm a refugee here. I would say that if you are going back and forth, you shouldn't try and hide that from the Canadian Embassy when they interview you, because if they know about it or find out about it, game over, you're disqualified. But they do understand the situation as it is, so just make sure that you tell people about it and you give the reasons why you're back and forth and the reasons why you can't stay in Syria, and it should be okay. Sorry, I can't be more specific, but it's an unusual circumstance.
Can you explain the difference? What happened on Saturday? How is it different than it was before? I understand now it's much more loose than it was, but I don't understand the details of that.
Okay, sure. So, previous to Saturday, when an announcement was made by Chris Alexander, groups of 5 and community sponsors needed a refugee status determination document, which is from usually the UNHCR or the state. Mostly in Turkey, it's the state. And unless they had that document, the groups of 5 or community sponsors could not submit a case. It didn't matter if they had all the resources, all the people, everything else, the case would automatically be denied. Because the refugees are now considered prima facie, which means that they are obviously refugees without needing that status document. They have been for a while, but our government has said that they are going to accept that status. They have relaxed the rules for groups of 5. For Syrians specifically, don't seem to have to submit that document in order to submit their cases. So it does open up other possibilities. So if you want to work, speaking of the union, by the way, to the woman who asked the question about the union, if your union wants to be a community sponsor and wants to take on the liability, they could potentially do it as a community sponsor. They're committing them to the union, to the sponsorship, committing the people and the resources. The groups of 5 can do these kinds of sponsorships, or sponsorship agreement holders who didn't need that determination document can still keep sponsoring. So that was one of the major changes. The government also pledged to put more resources in the region for people to be processed quicker. There were a few other commitments that they made, but those were the main ones that have relaxed the system and made it hopefully go up faster. They committed to any case that's currently in process to be processed and arrive by the end of this year, and the 10,000 that they promised to sponsor over 3 years, in January they promised to sponsor over 3 years, they now say they will do by September 2016. They haven't yet committed to any new numbers, so we're still looking at a cap of 10,000 potentially. That's all the Syrians they are going to sponsor, but it's an election, and this government or another government will probably increase that number. I say it like that because I'm on camera. So, next question.
Based on your chart, you showed various amounts that are needed to sponsor a specific family with specific numbers. If I, for example, can't raise that 25,000, am I able to take on a smaller family, maybe a family of 2 or 3 versus a family of 5 or 6?
So absolutely, fundraise as much as you can, get as many pledges as you can. and then tell us about that. What has been happening, certainly with the fund that's been established now and some funds that are coming in generally for Lifeline Syria, you might be able to be connected to funds that can up that. But yes, you can't, if you only raise a certain amount and you can't find any other funds, you probably have to decrease the number of people you can sponsor. But you might also want to connect to another group. Maybe it's a family of 8, but it's one case of 5 and one case of 3, and you can sponsor the 3 and they can sponsor the 5, and you gather together. So my best advice is do as much fundraising as you can and tell us and come to the next step session and figure out at that point who you can help.
One other quick question.
Sure.
Do you request like a specific family type, like do you want like a certain number of children, or you just assign a specific number of people because you ask for a family of 5?
So our the way we assign or we tell you about cases tend to be geographical and family size because of your financial commitment. So obviously, if you're in Oakville, you're not going to be helpful to a family that's in Scarborough. So we're looking at, you have the benefit here of having a very large Syrian community that wants sponsors here. I'd say most of my 50% of my cases are looking for sponsors here in Oakville. So that shouldn't be an issue. In terms of other requests, people will sometimes say to me, we'd love to sponsor family with children. And I say, well, considering that over 50% of the Syrian refugees are children, I think that's probably likely. If you're going to ask me for more specifics, if you're going to ask for a specific nationality, or like within Syria, like a Kurd or one of the smaller ethnic groups, or if you're going to ask for a specific religious group, I'd like to talk to people about why that is that they want that. Some groups have identified to me that their own community feels that they would best be able to support somebody from that community, and that's fine. But I am not necessarily going to be able to match you with that, so it might be a longer process. So on our form, you can say if you have any requirements, but understand that we might, it's not it might not be a perfect fit if those are your requirements.
Do you guys have some sort of adoption program for orphan minors?
This is a question I get asked a lot, and I completely understand it. So I have talked to a lot of lawyers who have been very generous with their time on sponsorship of orphans. And the best I can find out at this moment is that you have to adopt an orphan, and in a refugee context, these are considered unaccompanied minors. So there's separated minors and there's unaccompanied minors. A separated minor still has somebody who can be acting as their guardian. So maybe it's an adult sibling. Maybe it's an aunt or uncle who's not their actual parents, and they can be resettled with that family unit. If they are totally unaccompanied, at this point it is very hard, and I've never seen, I think I saw one case ever go through of a child that was got brought through as a refugee that was an orphan or unaccompanied. Usually you have to adopt them based on Canadian and international adoption principles, and we can't help with that. We're not set up for that. But thank you for the question.
My question is, once the family gets here, I've moved from province to province, and sometimes getting a driver's license or any sort of photo ID from the government can be a real challenge. A lot of times when you have to apply for things, even getting a library card or a bus pass, you need, proof of where you're living and photo ID and so on. It can be very challenging. What kind of documentation are these folks providing with? How can we help them get some things so they can start to access very basically getting a library card or getting a bus pass?
Right. So people are going to arrive with passports. Some people are not, and they'll be given a single journey document, which isn't really good for very much, quite frankly. They will get on landing a confirmation of landing paper, which will give information about their landing that can be used in some circumstances as proof of landing. I would encourage you to quickly help them find permanent residence, or some people, when they're using temporary residence, will write them a letter as their sort of landlord to say that they're living where they are. And then they can get things like a library card. They are waived from the 3-month requirement for wait for OHIP, but you have to sort of protest that sometimes, because sometimes if you don't say that they're a protected person on the form, it gets a little bit hairy. But there's not usually a lot of issues. Certainly, we are actually communicating with people in the provincial government to figure out if we have connections that we can, if you have a problem getting them a document, that we can help connect you to somebody. So that's one thing that we are working on. So hopefully we'll have help for that. No problem.
Do you need to set up a group of 5
Well, I regret naming it group of 5, quite frankly. Groups of 6, groups of 7, groups of 8, whatever size it is, not the official group of 5, which is an official part of the private sponsorship, but your group that's working under a SAW. So it doesn't have to be, can it be a smaller number is what you're asking. It can, it's not ideal. If, like this gentleman over here said, can I kind of be a group of 1? I would have a hard time, quite frankly, believing that 3 or 4 people are going to be able to handle this. I've done this for a long time. Summer break hits, people go away. You need more people. Christmas, people are busy. So it's not totally unreasonable that the sponsorship agreement holders might allow you to be a smaller group, but it's kind of unlikely. So I would again encourage you to tell us if you have a smaller group and you don't have any other people. It sounds like something's being started in here. We're here to try and help you go beyond that, so talk to us about it.
If they have a group of 5 or 6 people, maybe 2 of them are going to take on the financial responsibility.
Right?
The other ones sign on. Can they sign on with or having to take on the full responsibility? Or how does that, can you protect them in some way?
Right. So if you're sponsoring under a sponsorship agreement holder, ultimate liability of the funding is held by the sponsorship agreement holder, not by the individual 5 people, even though they do sign on as being liable for providing the services. But that could be split up between whoever is in the group. If you're sponsoring under the official group of 5 under private sponsorship, usually the rules were 3 or more people have to financially contribute. In practical terms, usually everyone has to contribute or else they get kicked off the group by the government. So I would encourage you, sponsorship agreement holder, if that's the state of your group.
I missed the first part, so I maybe didn't hear this, but has anybody actually come over yet? So do you have any experience or anybody who's experienced in terms of, especially this particular aspect? Because this is the part which, to my mind, is one of the most important things, because 32.5 for 6 people is relative poverty, especially if we're talking about Oakville. I live in Burlington, and I know that 32.5 is going to be a stretch.
Right.
So, does anybody have any experience as to how much this number could expand to?
Right.
And
Right.
what the actual costs are? Because once you take responsibility, as you said, there's a moral obligation to help these people, and not leave them destitute.
Right.
In a country that they don't understand.
Exactly. So as I said, which you might have missed, this is what you're liable for. A lot of people give more than this, and I would encourage you to talk to people who have the family size that you're looking to sponsor to find out what actual, I can tell you how much I spend as a single person. I can't tell you about a family of 5. So I would encourage you to talk to people about that. I would encourage you, though, not to go too high in terms of providing extra support, because in the fairly, possible event that they have to go on social assistance, if they're living in a place that you've helped them rent that is beyond their means, if they have to go on social assistance, it's really traumatizing for them to have to move again. So it's finding a fine balance. There are some goods and services that different companies are providing directly to Lifeline Syria. There's a cell phone company that's offering potentially to give free cell phones, 1 per family, with a plan attached to them, which, for Canada, that's great because that's a big cost. There's other startup costs that the Furniture Bank is in conversations with us. I don't know if you have an equivalency here or if they serve Oakville, but there's things that, donations of clothes offset the cost. So, yes, it's not a lot, but if you can manage to cover other things and that's all they're living on, maybe that's a bit easier, and I would top it up a little bit probably.
Hi, good evening. I apologize I was a bit late, so if I repeat something that you mentioned before.
Sure.
I would just like, before asking questions, I would like to say for those here that are related and have Syrian families, I can only speak from the heart. I've been deeply involved for the last few weeks through some activist groups, and I don't know if it's okay to share some of that. I have some amazing places online where people can actually get connected to the actual families. I can only say that my heart is totally sold. Amazing people, amazing stories. We have a group of 1,200 something people, so over 1,000 people online on Facebook group. It's an international group that supports Syrians and all other refugees. And all the feedback and all the
Okay.
read them, but I just had to share that. And that's pretty much what brought me here. And my questions, actually, I have a few quick ones. Since I was a bit involved, I got to realize some of the difficulties. So if you have, say, families of Syrians who are currently in Turkey now, as we speak, whether they're trying to cross or not crossing or crossing, my knowledge is that UNHCR does not register Syrians, right? However, they say that this is responsibility of Turkish authorities, and they are taking their sweet time on it.
Yeah.
Right? Why
Yeah.
go around the bush? 5-6 years, there is people that take incredible amount of time. Is there anything that the Canadian government is going to help us expedite that time?
Right. So in private sponsorship, if you're sponsoring with a sponsorship agreement holder, and as of Saturday, when the federal government relaxed the rules, you no longer need official document that says that these people are refugees. So they don't need, in the Turkey's case, the state, or in Jordan or Lebanon or Egypt or any other country, they don't need the UNHCR to give them this status. So we don't worry about that. It is terrible that they aren't registering them properly, but we don't worry about that for our program.
I heard it on the news. I just thought it was a little too good to be true, but that's left to be seen, right?
Yeah.
Second one is Lifeline Syria. Do you have a branch in Ottawa and other cities? Because I know of some families that have family members around Canada.
Yeah. So we are the Greater Toronto area based for our project. However, there are lots of projects starting up in other parts of Canada. Ottawa specifically, I know the mayor, I think next week is having, or maybe it's the end of October, is having a session. There's lots of other groups, especially through lawyer associations or universities, that are trying to start their own version of this. So I would encourage you to connect with a settlement agency, or for them to talk to religious or ethnic groups or the city officials in whatever area these people are looking for. We have some resources on our website under the Not in the GTA tab, where people can get an idea of other options.
And last question, I think. What about the so-called vulnerable cases? If there is a person with disability,
Right.
or a family that has a person with severe disability, are those cases taken into consideration to be expedited, and how much is actually expedited?
So if we are naming the case, and by, here in Canada, the group is saying that this case needs to be sponsored, quite frankly, it's sort of the discretion of the Canadian Visa Office abroad to decide to expedite or not to expedite. The only time these cases go faster is if the UNHCR themselves identify them and ask for them to be expedited. So all I can say to that is you have and will soon maybe have the same or a different member of Parliament who can talk to the Canadian government. We as Lifeline Syria don't have a whole lot of pull, quite frankly. We can try and identify them as being urgently in need, but that's a bit of an advocacy role that you could potentially play for these people.
I think these people are caught actually in a really deep and difficult crack, and I know that for this particular case, Turkish government is again not acting fast enough. UNHCR backs off, so basically there is nothing. I know of a person again waiting for over a year now, and his case is in a limbo, so I think those are people that looked at first.
So why don't we talk offline, and maybe I can give you some other suggestions.
When we got here, the councillor mentioned that there's a fund in Oakville for taking donations and issuing tax receipts. Is there something similar? I'm not from Oakville, I'm here from Toronto. Is there a similar organization in Toronto that will take donations for specific G5 groups and issue tax receipts, so that we're thinking of doing fundraising, but we want to be able to, say that we can give tax receipts to people when they donate?
Right. So if you are not already connected to any kind of group that can issue tax receipts, like a church or a charity like that, we have on our website Aqueduct, which is a foundation in Toronto that is issuing tax receipts for donations. At this point, we're in communications with them about how that money, if you also want to be the sponsoring group, will come out. And we hope to have an answer by next week. So I would say hold your pledges and your suggestions on how much money you're going to be able to bring forward, and hopefully we'll have a really clear answer for you sometime next week. And thanks for coming up from Toronto. I hope you didn't get stuck in the traffic we did.
I have a question about rent. If one of the member in real estate their place and they pay before, do you think that this amount will reduce because there is a place available for?
So if you have some place where people could stay that you could give them, so it would be considered an in-kind donation by the Canadian government. It has to meet certain standards. There's occupancy laws, so it can't just be that a family of 5 is living in a 1-bedroom in your house. There has to be certain rules that are required. But if you're able to meet those rules, then usually this amount is reduced by half that you're liable for. Great.
You talked quite a bit about the financial amounts. I'm interested in the financial practices, I guess. I'm trying to have a picture for myself about there's rent to be paid, families in are and it's time to pay the rent. Where does that check, or maybe I'm asking about best practices, where does that check come from?
Right.
Is there a joint, or what would you recommend? What would the picture be?
Right.
Is there a joint bank account that is in the name of one of the
Right.
5, 6, 7, 8, 10?
Right.
The councilors again talked about the Oakville Community Foundation, and I'm assuming maybe the bank account is a name, a subset of their bank
Right.
account, and we would buy them from there. What is the best practice to help me build that picture?
Sure, no problem. So the Oakville Fund, similar to the Aqueduct Fund that we have in Toronto, does not themselves give the money out afterwards. They give them to registered charities within their mandate to help alleviate poverty, which helping refugees is. So then they would plan to give the money out to the refugees or to the group sponsoring them. That's something I'm not going to specifically talk about because it has to be worked out. I understand there's going to be a panel that's going to be formed, it's going to be structured. But in a best practice sense, this would be my advice. If you don't need to get a tax receipt and you want to have your own account, open a trust account. Don't open an individual bank account for yourselves, so there's at least 2 people signing on to it. Give them, on arrival, discuss with the family, have it planned out how much you're going to give them per month and what your expectation is for them to use that on. Are you giving them money for rent and food and clothing and you're going to, pay for a cell phone differently, or there's other in-kind donations that are coming? Make it very clear what you're expecting them to have the money for and what they're supposed to use it for. Usually it's best then that you deposit that money into their bank account in some way, or write them a check, or however you want to give it to them, once a month, and they are autonomous adults that deal with their own funds. So, you always want to avoid being too sort of top down on people, because these are adults that have had a lot of things taken away from them over the years, and in a refugee situation it's very difficult. So you tell them your expectations, they try and make the money work, and it's best if you just give them the money once a month, the same way they would get government support. Is that sort of answering your question?
Sort of does. There's also one of the comments that the councilman made at the beginning is that the transparency, I guess, for financial contributors is that, again, I think the point that he was making was to say that in the event that the 6, 7, 8 people didn't know each other,
Right.
That would be a way that they could trust in the
Right.
accounting and transparency of the settlement organization. That would also be true, I guess, of the settlement agreement holders.
Yeah, the sponsorship agreement holders. So I don't want to speak too much about the Oakville Fund because it's here and I'm not running it. But my understanding is that they will have very clear information about how the money is being used, how it's being given out, how you access it. And then the sponsorship agreement holders, if they do take the money as a full deposit, the ones we work with usually, we don't work with anyone that we don't already know, and they will usually hold a trust account, or they'll hold an account in their office that you will get statements on, so you'll see the money, and then it's given directly back to the refugees over a period of the 12 months. I would also suggest we are having memorandums of understanding that we are creating as a draft, so we will make those available to groups. If you don't know each other very well, or if you just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page, complete the memorandum of understanding, express how money is going to be used, who's going to be on a trust account, sign it up front, you don't worry about it hopefully anymore.
Shown by the board liability, does this include that
does it include the which cost?
The mortgage we have pledged. The total
Yeah.
the amount shown doesn't include the housing.
Housing, sorry. You keep moving the mic away from your mouth. Doesn't include housing. Yes. The total liability and then the amount of the income support, which per month, is supposed to cover all of their costs: housing, clothing, food, transportation, everything. So technically on the undertaking, what it will say is you're required to provide enough money to cover accommodations, clothing, food, transportation. I think those are only the official ones that you have to make sure you're covering. And yes, this money is supposed to cover that.
Thank you. Two quick questions. You briefly mentioned about the blended referral program, which I understand that the government supports with half of the total cost, but I heard that the list of, there are no families in that list at the moment. So if you can talk a little bit
Sure.
more about that.
Yeah.
And the second question
Okay.
is, I saw on TV that there are some school councils that are organizing to support, and I'm trying to involve the school where my kids go to.
Right.
So, in the relationship with your Lifeline Syria, are they applicants as a group or as a community? Two type of
Right.
applicants that you mentioned.
Right.
Is it the same or is it a different kind of process? That
Sure. Sure. So let me answer the second question first. It's a bit shorter, and then I'll talk about this program. So Dawson School in Toronto, which is very close to where our volunteer center is, has just announced that they're sponsoring and they're challenging other schools to sponsor. My understanding is that they are going to fundraise in the school, and then they'll have a core team that will sort of do the settlement. Likely we'll connect them with a sponsorship agreement holder. There'll be one person that will sign on officially saying that that they're signing on behalf of the group, but the group is going to have to decide who's officially involved, who's signing on a memorandum of understanding if they choose to do it that way, and then who's going to be ultimately responsible for the family. But they'll sign under a sponsorship agreement holder so that they aren't individually committing to the federal government, at least, to be liable. They might, but I quite frankly doubt it, that have the school take on that liability. I really don't think that's going to happen. So I suspect it's just going to be, it's a parent-led initiative. The parents are going to be from the group. It's really just another way of forming, like a union or a neighborhood group or something like that. So that's how they're planning on doing it. To your first question, I kept waiting for someone to ask so I could pull out my chart. So these are the two kinds of cases who can be sponsored: named cases and blended visa office referred cases. Named cases fully funded by the sponsors, identified the sponsors, usually because they have family or friends in Canada. Blended visa office referred, or BVOR cases, they get 6 months of income support from the government, so not 6 months of the whole liability, but just the income, the 12 months. And the sponsors provide the other 6 months and the startup costs. And you can see the chart again when you pick up the handout. These are cases that are identified by UNHCR, go through the CIC process in the embassies overseas, and then are put on a list to be available to groups. You're right that there haven't been that many. Until about April, there were 7 families that were identified. Until last year, there was 1. There have been more. They're starting to see increases of this. I can't guarantee that these cases will come forward, but I think the Canadian government is understanding that we'd like these cases to come forward because we have groups. So at some point, Lifeline Syria is most likely going to say, we have all these groups. Some of them have been matched with families here, but they're still waiting for cases. Hello, government, do you have cases? So we're in contact, we have access to those cases, but I can't guarantee you that next week you'll have one. Okay? And just a final point to that, they do tend to be more difficult cases. They're referred by the UNHCR because, for instance, one family of 8 and someone is a paraplegic. One family where it is grandma, mom and dad, and a lot of kids. We're talking equivalent of a family of 15. And low literacy rates, and grandma has a lot of health concerns. So they're not easy cases. A lot of people will take these cases on because financially it's not so difficult. You're going to want to up your number of people who are helping with these cases if you take one of these cases on. But you know what? A school community, especially with a lot of little kids, it's a great community to support. Thanks.
Say your group is composed mainly of non-residents, non-citizens. Can you still afford an application? Or, and if you can, it's just going to take longer in the process?
So when you say, are they permanent residents but not citizens, or are they just not even in Canada?
Visa or work permit, or it's guaranteed to be here for the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay. We'd have to try and talk. You certainly couldn't do a group of 5, official group of 5 with the federal government, because the members have to be permanent residents or Canadian citizens. We could talk to a sponsorship agreement holder if they would feel comfortable that the people in that group would be here and committed long enough that they would be able to support when the family arrives. I would suspect that they're going to want at least some people to be permanent residents or Canadian citizens, because sometimes cases take a long time to be processed and people's visas might run out. So it's not a no, but it's a let's talk about it in a different way, okay? Hi.
If I don't have 5 people to do the
Yep.
sponsorship agreement, do I have an option, please?
You can try and make friends out here. It sounds like the city's going to create a list of people who are looking to be matched. Go on our website and sign up and say that you're a group that's ready to sponsor, even if it's just you or 1 or 2 other people, family members, friends, and come to our next steps session, where we are going to ask people to try and connect with other groups. So it doesn't remove you from sponsoring. We're going to try and help you connect with other groups.
Now, let's say I have 3 people. We have like a very good income.
Right?
The other 2, they are retired. They don't have income.
Right.
Strong.
Mhm.
Do they qualify?
If you are sponsoring under a sponsorship agreement holder, it doesn't matter who's contributing financially, whether it's 2, 3, 10, 1. If you're doing it as a group of 5, in theory, only 3 people need to contribute. In practice, probably all 5 usually have to contribute. So I would encourage you then to sponsor under a sponsorship agreement holder. We can connect you with one of those sponsorship agreement holders, but it sounds like you've got a great group. People who are retired are great for daytime tasks, so that sounds good. Okay, you're welcome. Hi.
Some of the families, they have the financial capabilities to support themselves, but they're sitting only safe haven. Now, how can that work here? They can support themselves.
Right. So, first and foremost, especially if you're sponsoring under a sponsorship agreement holder, the refugee cannot be required to prepay or repay this cost of their sponsorship. However, the next line in the clause of the sponsorship agreement says that if they have the ability to support themselves, they should be contributing those funds to support themselves. But what happens sometimes is people have the money now. We don't know what's going to happen when they get here. They might be using that money to support themselves while they're overseas. So if you still need to show that there's the potential that your group can sponsor them, that can get the money there, you can't depend on them having that money. You have to show you have at least capacity to fundraise that money or have it in pledges or something when they arrive. They can be identified as a self-supporting refugee. It is a category under immigration, but they still need like a backer, which would be your group. But that will mean that you discuss with them ahead of time that your expectation is if they have the money that they should be contributing that to their settlement when they get here. And that's a conversation you should have with them and confirm it ahead of time, because again, you can't require them to prepay or repay the settlement costs. Okay? But if you have more questions, we can talk offline about it, okay?
Is there a requirement that all group members live in the same city or within a certain geographical distance? In our group, we've got people within the GTA, but
Right.
across different cities, so I'm just wondering what's fine.
So it used to be that when processing in Canada was decentralized, you'd have to live in the same geographic space as the local office that was processing your case. So there would have been one in Hamilton, there would have been one in Toronto, there would have been other places, St. Catharines, those kind of places. They've centralized that so they don't follow those rules anymore. But the rule of thumb is how quickly can you get to the family that you're sponsoring? So if, you're in Oakville and other people are in GTA, and the family's going to be settled in Oakville Potentially, the group can be part of that from the GTA, but there still has to be someone close enough to the family that if there's an emergency, they can help get to them very quickly, because you can't have them. I mean, I had a group one time in Toronto that was in downtown Toronto, and they settled the family at Yonge and Sheppard, and nobody drove. And so trying to take the subway up to Yonge and Sheppard, especially on a Sunday, a bit difficult. So that was not the best settlement, quite frankly. So I would say let us know where everyone is, and we can try and evaluate if that's an appropriate space. You're welcome. So it looks like we're done. Thank you so much, everyone.